I think the really important thing is to look actually outside of the English-speaking world for the opportunities that are there. For example, studying in the UK is extremely expensive. Studying in America is extremely expensive. But Germany, but Germany, for example, actually offers free higher education to people from all over the world. But you have to prove that you're able to operate on their courses with the language, which means you need a B2 C1 level to be able to do postgraduate study in Germany. But if you can demonstrate that you've got that, you don't actually have to pay for tuition.
Wow. Hi, I'm Jade.
And I'm Tsechel.
And this is your next episode of TLT Talks. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
We have Alex Rawlings in the house with us again today. It's such a privilege having you back in the hot seat with us and continuing the conversation. We got a lot of feedback and wonderful response from the first conversation we had with you. How are you feeling? Welcome back.
I'm great. It's really nice to be here again. Thank you so much for having me.
I know, two episodes in a row.
Right.
But there's just so much to know. So much to know when it comes to languages and so much to ask you. So we're really looking forward to it.
And I think that's the whole idea of today is we really just want to continue the conversation on languages. And in the first episode, specifically with Alex, when we spoke about languages, we spoke about how leadership and the influence of language plays a role in connection with people, right, and how important it is to start looking a little bit differently at how we use our languages. But today we're going to continue expanding on the conversation of how language can benefit you in getting a job in different countries, what some of the laws are right now in some of the spaces and places that we see internationally. But I want to start off today by asking a question, and throughout this entire conversation, please, all of us are here to have a chat with each other. We don't just have to answer questions. We can all share our minds. But one of the things that I want to get into right off the bat, especially coming on the kind of atmosphere and area of talking how language can help you to get into different countries.
Right.
And you both can answer this, please, feel free. Would you ever move to a different country?
And you're both looking at me because I'm not from here.
Yes. I feel like the accent kind of gives you away. So, we can just address the elephant in the room.
Yeah. Would I ever move to a different country? Yes, I have. I've moved here and to a bunch of other places. I don't know. I always wanted to live in different countries.
Right.
I always felt like, why do I need to stay in the country that I was born in? Why? Just because you could be born anywhere in the world and you're born here and it's great, but there's a world out there and you want to go explore it. So I actually do remember I was about 10 years old and I was in the car with my mum and, I grew up in the UK and I'm sure you guys know we have this very specific problem there with the climate where we have about 10 months of winter. And I just remember the rain coming down on the windscreen and we're in traffic. And I turned to my mum and said, why do we live here? Why can't we go somewhere else?
Somewhere sunny.
Yeah, because my mother's from Greece as well. So it's kind of like, it was an obvious place to go with nice weather and nice food and the sea and all that kind of thing. But, ever since then, I just thought, I don't want to be restricted or defined by the fact that I was born in this country. It's not even that important to me to have like a homeland or to have a place that I'm from. I just want to have lots of places all over the world where I feel at home.
So have you moved to the various countries that you have been in now? And I would love for you to mention some of those you've been to and some of those you look forward to staying in the future, perhaps, if there are any. But have you done them with the goal of introducing yourself into that language by learning the culture and the environment? Has this kind of been a method of learning a language better? Or is this something that you just personally have loved to do, just go to different countries and learn different cultures?
I think for me, the most important thing is just about experiencing different cultures around the world and traveling and seeing things. And for me, language is the way to do that. So the language is the hard work in a way, kind of sitting there studying, showing up every day, doing your hour a day of language study and learning vocabulary and grammar and all that kind of thing. being able to go to that place and use that language is the reward. So I've lived in a bunch of different countries. Apart from the UK, I lived there for most of my life, but I spent a year in Russia when I was studying Russian at university. I spent a year in Hungary. I spent about 5 years in Spain. Now, obviously, I've been in South Africa. It's coming up to a year. So I've lived in a bunch of different places. Hungary was very specifically because I wanted to learn Hungarian, because Hungarian's kind of the most different language that we have in Europe. Of all the different ones. Like you don't understand it if you speak another European language. So I thought to really learn this language, I've got to be there every day in the post office, in the supermarket, using it kind of. And after about a year, I started to get quite conversational in it.
So you're the type of person that tourists kind of respect. Yes. When you go and you travel, I think like what you said, to get the heartbeat of a culture is to learn the language, but it is the hard work that is attached to it. And so I definitely think, like I remember when I would travel and there would be commentary about, tourists have arrived and how they kind of like the other of the nation. But I think when you take that responsibility on yourself to kind of really integrate yourself into the world that you're emerged into, I think you get a completely different perspective and a result from it when you leave than if you just come as an outsider wanting to remain
completely.
In that sphere.
I just think that you can't really experience another culture without understanding the language and speaking it. Because if you can't understand the conversations going on around you quite randomly, you're not really engaging. You're relying on someone who speaks your language to come along and explain everything to you. And I always feel very uncomfortable when that happens. I'm always like, oh, wow, I'm putting so much pressure on this person to translate. But then also, I do just want to go and speak to random people and find out things. I don't want to just be kind of doing everything through English. So
exactly.
Especially so when it comes to living in a foreign country, to me, it's just, and I know people who've done it. I really do know people who've lived in a foreign country and just spoken English, but it's just unimaginable to me that you would think that that's okay, because it's not, don't you want to know what's going on around you? Don't you want to be able to speak to your neighbors? Don't you want to, it's just like, if you think about it in terms of like maybe 10% of the population where you're living speaks English at a level where you can have a meaningful interaction with them. But what about that other 90%? What if your lifelong friends are in that group?
Absolutely.
How are you going to engage? You've got to make the effort. You've got to learn the language.
I think it's kind of the difference between watching a 2D and a 3D movie. Yeah. Like you get that full immersion when you're able to speak the language of the country that you live in. And what are some of the countries that you would like to possibly live in the future? I mean, you mentioned a few that you have lived in previously or prior to coming to South Africa. What are some of the countries that are on your bucket list that you would absolutely love to tick off? Are there any?
I'm still in my first year here, so I'm still very much in the honeymoon phase
of South Africa.
It doesn't go away.
I hope it doesn't. No, but honestly, it was like, for me, this thing of living in such a diverse, such a multilingual society where language is just everything. I mean, that's a dream come true. And I'm not joking. I mean, like I first found out about South Africa when I was about 13, 14 years old. And that's when I was like, maybe I should be there. And it's taken me over half my life to get here. And now I'm just so happy to be here. I'm not thinking about going to other places to live. Like when I think about going to other places, I always imagine getting on a plane and coming back to Johannesburg afterwards, which is quite an interesting thought. I don't think about staying there.
I love that.
Sounds great.
Especially because it's different to like the first part of your life where you're like, okay, I'm finding my home. And then you kind of have found it in this linguistic hub of cultures and of languages. But then I would ask, because South Africa does have so many languages, how has it been in learning that? Because in Hungary, it's Hungarian. In South Africa, there's 11. So how has that been like navigating that?
Yes, there's 11 languages, and there's also a lot of linguistic cues here that you need to be aware of. Right. I mean, you can't just walk into an engine garage and start speaking Zulu to someone as a white person in this country. Like you actually can't do that. It's kind of not polite. People expect you to speak English, and as much as I don't want to be speaking English to everyone, we have to navigate that situation. Right. So I'm still learning about that. I'm still learning about where it's appropriate to use other languages, how much of a conversation in English do we need to have before it's okay to switch, things like this. All this stuff is here, and I think for you guys, this is all just in your DNA. Like you're so used to navigating all these different languages in these spaces. For someone who's come here quite fresh, and for someone who's come here from Europe, where like we don't have this A country like Spain doesn't have English, Spanish. It's just Spanish. You're going to do
Right.
everything in Spanish, and there's no question you wouldn't speak it. It's an interesting thing to navigate.
Absolutely.
Being here.
I mean, even I think like South Africans code switch a lot, like in the middle of sentences. Like we'll go like from speaking, English to Afrikaans, and then have a little bit like of a Zulu saying just hopped in there. And then we'll be able to like flow from like one sentence to the other. And I feel like as an outsider looking in, that might be like a confusing thing to navigate.
But it's a beautiful thing to navigate because there's so much depth in that. I think
Yes.
that's what I get so excited about. It's like, I don't know. I mean, if you think about the languages you speak as like your wardrobe, if you just speak English, it's like you have one jacket. But if you speak like 5 languages, you've got 5 jackets, and you can take them on, take them off. And, it's really cool.
I really love that analogy.
You just choose how you want to dress up that day. And I think that's what's cool for me about languages in South Africa. It's like some days people feel like they want to speak English. Some days people want to speak Tswana. Some days people want to throw in some Afrikaans. That's beautiful. I'm here for it. I'm here to be part of that.
And so I would say, like, what are some of the advantages besides like getting that cultural, diverse outlook on life? What are other advantages that you have or have learned with living in different countries?
I think it's just so valuable to always challenge your preconceived notions of things, because the place you live in, the environment you grow up in, the societies that you belong to, they can really give you such a specific view of the world. And you sometimes forget that, your little corner of the world
Isn't the
not
world.
the world. Exactly. So when you live in different countries and you really go deep and you really speak the languages and you really kind of out there fending for yourself and learning things every single day, that's where you kind of really get challenged on a level of identity. It makes you think about what are your values,
Right.
Which ones of your values do you take with you when you go to another environment? Which ones are you happy to leave by the door? Which new ones do you learn while you're there? I mean, that's the really exciting thing that being in those countries and speaking different languages can bring.
So let's say one of our viewers watching now, or even one of us in studio here, are listening to this conversation and we're thinking, wow, maybe it's time for me to explore the options of moving to another country, not just from a language and cultural experience viewpoint, but just the fact that it's something that could potentially expand them as a person in their identity. Love the fact that you touched on that. What would one need to move to another country? Because I think for a lot of us, especially in South Africa, I mean, you've gotten the feel for South Africa now, and it's a place where you can get really comfortable really quickly. And there's so much to do and so much to see in this country that I feel like oftentimes as a nation, we are homebodies. We actually, although there are a lot of people that are obviously immigrating right now, but for other reasons, I think it's difficult for us in our cultural mindset to just go like, oh yeah, I'm just going to get out of the country and move to another place for a year or two. And you can even speak on this as well a little bit, because you were in New York for a year and elsewhere.
In Canada, yeah.
Yes. What would one need to move to another country? How do you make that shift in your mind?
So actually, much like Alex, I kind of grew up always knowing that I wanted to leave South Africa. Not because I
love that.
Not because I didn't love South Africa, but I realized that there were so many people in the world that were doing so many amazing things. And there was just so much going on all over the world. And I was like, oh, I want to be a part of that. The UN, where is that? Let me go there. Broadway, where is that? Let me go there. So it was kind of like recognizing, I guess you could say, the color of life. And as much as there's so much color in this nation, there's so much color in the globe. And so at a young age, I kind of just had that desire. And then when I was in high school, my parents kind of just like opened up the opportunity for me. And so I applied and I got a student visa to go to school in Canada. So actually, it's funny because the first year, me and my sister were there by ourselves. So our parents were in South Africa and we were like navigating this new country, and like a new hemisphere, a new continent by ourselves. But I loved it. And I think, again, like there's certain things that you realize that you take with you. And it's like, oh, okay, these are the values I uphold. This is how I see the world. This is a person that I want to be. And that I carry through with me wherever I go. But also look at these experiences, look at these cultures, look at these languages, look at these expressions of identity that I get to experience in a new way. So I loved that. And then with New York, same thing. It was an opportunity for me to study musical theater. And I feel like New York is kind of the place where you would study musical theater. And so the same thing, the F1 student visa. So I think if you are a student and you want to have a travel abroad experience, anything of that sort, the student visa is the way that you're going to get that. Unfortunately, that means you can't work while you're in that country. So you have to study. And then after you study, maybe your program has a transitional visa thing for you where you could go from an F1 visa to an O1 visa where you can work after you've graduated. But yeah, I would say that does have some financial impairments if you are financing from South Africa, but you're looking at fees that are American US dollars, then you're looking at exchange rates. So it really comes at a cost no matter how you look at it. The cost of if you stay in South Africa is there's some of color that you might not experience, but the cost of going is that there's probably a large financial burden. So that's just something that you would have to weigh.
So maybe as a South African, would it be right to say that there's small disadvantages in terms of the type of visas that we would have to get in order to go overseas, and it would have to be very specified? Just based off of that, Alex, how have you experienced your travels in terms of visa processes and moving to other countries? Has this been something that has been as much as a thought in your mind, or have you basically had the freedom to kind of just say, I'm in the mood. Ek's lus om na 'n ander country toe te gaan.
I'm in the mood to move.
You know, I'm in the mood to move. Let's move. Because that is also something that could be debilitating for a person to say, I want to go to another country. What are your thoughts and feelings around just allowance processes, visa applications, these kinds of things? How have you been getting around that?
So first of all, there's no easy way around bureaucracy. Like bureaucracy is the worst part of life. It doesn't matter what you're doing, and it doesn't matter what country you're in. It's always really bad. Like everyone here complains about home affairs, and I'm like, I understand why you're complaining, but come with me next time I need to renew my Greek passport, and come spend a week with me in a police station in Greece, because that's how we get it done. You know,
a week in a police station.
Yes, because you're always missing a document, and then police station near my village where I'm registered is an hour and a half's drive away. So it's like if I'm missing one document, it's like 3 hours.
No.
So it takes a week. But you get to know the people, become friends. You add them on Facebook, you know, it's how it works. It actually helped my father a lot when he needed to apply for a visa to stay in Greece after the UK left the European Union. And that's the second thing that I was going to say. Like in Europe, where I'm from, it's difficult to say we, because I'm British, but I'm also Greek. I have both passports. So the UK used to be part of the European Union, but decided to leave for all sorts of reasons, which means that British people now have exactly the same right to live in a country like Germany as you do as a South African. We're all
cool.
British people and South Africans are all in the same queue for visas right now for
it actually makes it a little bit more difficult now.
Exactly, because this was always a huge advantage British people had in Europe, was that they were native English speakers who had the right to live in Europe, but now they're not. They have the same right to live in Europe as you do. So if you want to move to Germany, you do exactly the same process that a British person has to do now. However, as I still have a Greek passport, Greece is in the European Union. The European Union kind of functions a little bit like America, like the United States, in that you can live anywhere you want across those places. There's a few restrictions, like you have to register. Some countries require you to have a job after 3 months, but actually it's an enormous privilege to have a passport of the European Union, because you literally can just say, okay, ek's lus, let's go. And that is how I moved around a lot, because you don't have borders. I mean, driving from Spain to France is like driving from Gauteng to Limpopo. There's no border check. You just go over.
Who wants to go to Europe?
Imagine, yes, let's
Let's go. That's the next trip.
No, and it really is. It's something very cool. I mean, let's also not play down what led to this situation being there. There was multiple world wars, lots of conflict, hundreds of years of all sorts of strife. But now you're in a position where you can get in your car in Lisbon and get out of your car in Estonia, which is like several thousand kilometers away, and you won't have a border check in that whole zone.
Wow.
So that's kind of how things work in Europe. When I came here, obviously I had to apply for a visa. And there's all sorts of very interesting requirements that you have to do. I had to have a full chest scan. I had to have a psychological health assessment at the
And how
Rosebank
did that
Hospital.
turn out for you?
Well, the lady was like, your blood pressure seems a bit high. And I was like, I'm very stressed because you're asking me a lot of questions. She's like, okay, I'll give you a clean bill of health, but you should check that. And I was like, I know I'm fine. I'm just stressed.
It's just
But it was quite interesting because there was me in the hospital in Rosebank on this, bed with my blood pressure being monitored and all this stuff, and people filling in these forms with the South African kind of coat of arms on it.
So
to say
all
that
of
I'm
that
sane.
was required to come into our country?
Yes.
I didn't know that
And the doctors are there with
intense.
their checkboards going, oh, interesting that you want to come here. Most people are going the other way. And then my blood pressure went insane. I was like, I don't want to have this conversation with you right now. Please just fill in the form and let me go to the embassy.
Yes.
But, it was kind of a thing because they're all sort of there going, oh, well, we'd rather like to live in London and we want to. And I was going, cool, let's talk in 5 years when I've lived here for 5 years, you've lived there, and then we can compare experiences.
Exactly.
But it's quite interesting because I actually, as a European living here, encountered this a lot. People saying, but why would you want to come here? We're all trying to go there. And I'm kind of thinking, I'm very excited that that's ahead of you and you're going to have that journey and you should live in other countries and you should experience it. But let's talk about it when we're both on an equal position of experience. Because a lot of people in South Africa, I think, really put the idea of living in a foreign country on this pedestal. They think it's going to be amazing. A friend of mine has just gone to Amsterdam for a few days and he actually sent me a message and said, it's filthier than Joburg. I can't believe it.
It's so hilarious. I had the exact same reaction when I moved to New York because keep in mind, there's this whole glamorized version. We all know the song with Alicia Keys, Empire State of Mind, Concrete Jungle. You know what I mean? Every single movie ever, that just takes place, Gossip Girl, TV shows. So I get there with my suitcase. I have like the whole scene prepped out in my mind. And it's literally like Braamfontein. I'm literally not even kidding. Also, the smells are ridiculously awful. Like worse than I don't even know. I've never smelled that in South Africa. Also, there's just rats everywhere. But we all know this about New York. Rats, subways, apartments. Also, garbage cans on the streets because everything is like literal buildings. So you walk out and the garbage disposal is right in front of you. And basically everything smells like dog pee because the roads or the sidewalks.
Anyone watching from the New York or US Embassy, I'm not saying anything. I still want to come see your country.
No, I love New York, but I will say it bursted my bubble. And the same thing with Canada. I was like, oh my gosh, there is a gigantic pedestal of it almost being like the gold pot on the other end of the rainbow moving overseas, or it's what's that movie with Dorothy?
Oh yes, going with your shiny shoes to
Take your shiny shoes.
Take your shiny shoes, going to the green whatever palace and finding the wizard there that'll make all your dreams come true.
Exactly. And what was the conclusion? There's no place like home.
Exactly.
And so that was kind of my experience where I was like, wow, don't get me wrong. The Wizard of Oz, cool dude. But there's no place like home.
Sure. That's so deep. Come on.
It took me
But
a
you
while.
can enjoy South Africa in the meantime.
I think you will.
I really enjoy South Africa, but honestly, I think one of the reasons why I can enjoy it so much is because I have seen so much of the world. So I know that what you guys have got here is very special.
Yes.
However, I mean, I am aware that I'm saying this with a huge position of privilege because I have lived in different countries. And that's why I really still think that people should move to other countries. They should experience that. They should get the work experience. They should build the international network. They should do all of that. Just even, I mean, that's all the boring practical stuff you put on LinkedIn. Just the memories, just the stuff that's on the camera roll of your brain from having lived in those places is so cool and so valuable, So I really think people should do that. But once you've done that, I think you're going to see this place in a very different light because what you have here is very special.
Wow.
That means a lot.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Love that.
And so I just have to ask this because I've only moved to countries that are English speaking. So when moving to another country, do you need, it's your preference to learn the language of that country, but do you need to learn the language of that country for any other particular reason other than wanting to fully immerse yourself in the culture? Like, has it given you a competitive advantage?
Yes.
Oh,
100%. Because again, think about this. I mean, let's just think about this in terms of statistics. Like, how many job vacancies are there where you can get by only speaking English in a country like, say, the Netherlands or France? You know, still quite a lot, but it's not 100%, right? So if you're only opening yourself up to this avenue of jobs in your area specific of specialization that only speak English, you're cutting yourself from all of that. You know, also the other advantage that you've got going to those countries is that you're a native English speaker, which means you can write English perfectly, you can speak it fluently. But if you can also speak the other languages and understand them that's going around, you can actually be the bridge in an organization between the people that do and the people that don't speak English. But if you're just there being the English speaker, you know, you're draining a lot of resources. You're requiring people to speak a foreign language, that kind of thing. So that's all the LinkedIn stuff. On the day-to-day level, people, even if they do speak English, and it depends which country you go to. I mean, Spain is overwhelmingly a not English-speaking country, and that's where I spent the last 5 years. I'm just thinking every time I went into a pharmacy, every time I went into a post office, every time I needed someone to come and fix my boiler, we couldn't have done it in English, I'm telling you.
Wow.
They wouldn't have done it. They would have maybe, you know, grunted a few words reluctantly, but it wouldn't have been a nice interaction, you know, and you just don't know what's going on. You just don't know what's happening. So as I said, I do know people who live in countries like Spain, countries like Germany, even places like China, and they only speak English. But I just see them having a very narrow world. And really, if you're going to go and live in somebody else's country, in their society, and you're going to benefit from that, whether that's from making more money, whether that's from career opportunities, whether that's from cultural enrichment, it's just common courtesy to at least learn the basics of that language, but with the view to the longer you're there to speak more and more and more. And just for yourself, you know, I mean, one of the experiences you have when you're in a foreign country is you often feel very kind of estranged. You feel a little bit out of place, but actually being able to listen into conversations and know what's going on, that makes you feel like you're at home. And if you land, I'm just thinking about when you've been home and you land in your new country and you start hearing that language, if that makes you feel out of place, that's not a good thing. Actually, you want to hear that language and think, oh, I'm home. I understand that. And that's why you need to speak the language.
Wow. Love the connotation you've made to the fact that it can actually, we've been saying there's no place like home, but what if multiple countries feel like home just because you know the language?
Right. And
home is not just, absolutely. It's not just one place. It can be many places when it becomes home through the connection of language. That's stunning.
It becomes home through the connection of language. Wow, I think that needs to be put somewhere. Maybe that needs to be like somewhere in the conversation.
We'll add it onto the little short clips that we put up on Instagram.
I like that. And does it help?
Editors are listening.
Yes.
Does it help in the visa application process?
Right. So this really depends. Obviously, coming to South Africa, I could do everything in English. No one was asking me about my language skills, but actually the way I applied for my visa was on the basis of being an author. There's a specific visa type here for people who are artists who write. You have to submit a proposal for the project you want to work on while you're here. My project was all about languages and multilingualism and writing about that. So in a way, I got my visa to come live in South Africa through being multilingual and taking an interest in South Africa's multilingualism, but it's not obligatory. I mean, lots of people don't do that. But I do believe that there are countries which actually they have a points-based system for visas. And if you're able to demonstrate a specific level of proficiency in a language, they will give you more points, which means that you're more likely to get a visa. And I believe Canada is one of those countries. If you apply to live in Quebec, which of course is an autonomous French-speaking region of Canada, the fact that you speak French gives you more points, which means you're more likely to be accepted, which means you can go and start your new life. So actually, you know, speaking those languages really helps. And then thinking in the long term, because I think one thing a lot of South Africans talk about is passport privilege, right? Living abroad is about getting a different color passport, which means travel gets a bit easier. The vast majority of those countries will not naturalize you as a citizen of their country if you can't speak an intermediate to advanced level of the language. You will have to pass a language test in order to become a German citizen, to become a Spanish citizen. I know for Greece, you also need to pass quite a difficult language test to get that passport. So, if you start learning the language now, think about it. You need to live in that country for 5 to 10 years. If you're keeping that up as a habit of learning that language for 5 to 10 years, you'll reach the level you need to naturalize as a citizen. You'll get that passport. But without the language, you just cannot do it.
Oh, that's really a hard fact.
Yeah.
And I feel like it just goes to show we can't sit here and talk about passport privilege. This conversation is not about how to get into another country based on your passport. It's about the benefit of language and what it can do for your future, your career, how you get into another country, how that expands so many things. It's not just on the first conversation connecting with other human beings in their language. It's so much bigger than that.
It's opening up a whole new world for yourself.
Absolutely. Let's sing Aladdin together. Where's the magic carpet, guys? Where's the magic carpet? Let's fly.
Yeah.
We're going today. Let's go.
But you don't even have to go that far to experience this. I mean, last month I was in Mozambique, which of course is a Portuguese-speaking country. I have a different passport to everybody else going through, so I had to fill in a specific form and do this. Let me tell you, nobody at that border post, which is the main border post between South Africa and Mozambique, spoke English. If I didn't speak Portuguese, I'd probably still be there.
Sure.
Trying to fill in.
Exactly.
Because there was this big thing that they only had one pen, and we were kind of going around asking all the people, what's it thing? And I can't remember the word for pen. Someone was saying, tinha mais eles me levam. And I was like, oh my gosh. What would I do if I couldn't speak Portuguese? And it was also, I have to say, it was one of the weirdest experiences I've had living in South Africa. Here I am in kind of Lebombo border post in Mpumalanga, getting stamped out by someone with a Home Affairs t-shirt. I walk across a bridge, people going, bon dia, and we're suddenly speaking Portuguese, and there's not a drop of English. And I'm thinking, but South Africa's just over there. Can I go back and get my phrase book? But it really is. And once you cross that border into Mozambique, English disappears. It's
That's
absolutely
crazy.
incredible.
I went to Mozambique when I was very young, so I had very little knowledge and memories. I mean, I remember like the moments that I shared with my family, but in terms of language, I was just like, this is different. But actually for me, and this is kind of embarrassing, but I'm a horrible linguist. Horrible. And even though I'm born and raised in South Africa, this is an interesting thing that only I feel like a percentage of South Africans can relate to me on this. But like in a post-apartheid world where my parents kind of knew what it was like to speak their home language, but be forced into an educational system that promoted Afrikaans and English. And then going into a corporate world or trying to expand globally and having their home language be an impediment to their outreach. So their angle with my sister and I was to do the complete opposite. So they put us into like all like the private schools where you just learn like everything in English. And then at home we spoke English. And so now it's like when I go to the garage, like people start speaking to me in vernac and I'm just like,
very nice.
Sorry, I only speak English fluently. And they're like, your name? Tsegofatso. Surname? Molepo. Kesipedi. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then on top of that, I'm like, I lived in Canada. I'm like, no one spoke to me in any, you know what I mean? And even to this day, like I have family functions where sometimes my aunts and uncles will forget. And then they'll literally be like, she doesn't understand. And so now my sister and I are like trying to do Duolingo Zulu and like trying to learn. But it's an interesting thing that I feel like me and a couple of my Black friends that kind of grew up in that strange early 2000s era whose parents were getting out of very impoverished situations and offering their children a better future, saying, it's over there. It's in those English-speaking countries. Let me prepare you for that. Sure. So then you're always in this like weird place where you're not fully integrated into the worlds that you're, kind of immersing yourself into, but you're also not fully integrated into the place that you call home. So that's an interesting...
And it's something that we spoke about the last time. You put so much emphasis on how first, second, third generation native tongue speakers, they basically lose that. And one of the things that you were saying is that by the time that we get to third generation only South Africans, half of them are not going to even know any of the languages that we speak natively in this country. And it was such a good point that you brought up, and it just goes to show. But it's not because of something that necessarily happened or switched where someone was going, I don't want to learn that or teach that. It was, again, the thought of how can a certain language that I teach my children now in this space benefit them in their future? And so there's constantly this thing driving around in our minds of like, how can a language benefit me here or my child there or our future there? But we should never lose our heritage.
Because language is power.
Absolutely.
It's a powerful tool.
Put that one in a quote somewhere.
Come on. Which camera? That one. Language is power. And so I would say, I think they knew that there was going to be some rooms I would be able to enter if I spoke English in a certain manner. And they wanted to equip me with that powerful tool. But then coming back and speaking to South Africans in your own language is power and gives you respect amongst them. Like, I know that I don't have respect amongst certain South Africans, and I get it. I understand. I'm a trader, but I mean, it's. I mean, I'm not.
Yes.
But you know what I mean? I'm not.
You're not.
But
You're a symptom of the circumstances in which you brought up.
I'm a symptom of the circumstances, and in some way we all are. But it is that thing of like, then what are you gonna do?
Completely. Well, I mean, I just come back to the coat analogy because I like jackets. I have a lot of jackets. When I moved here from Spain, I had to get rid of a lot of them, unfortunately.
Why?
Weight restrictions, luggage.
Dang.
You know, not all of those jackets can go through Doha, but there you go.
Wow. I think they just like took it for themselves. They were like, oh, free jacket. That's cute.
Possibly.
No, but it's like, you know, let's think about English as a jacket. It's a lovely jacket. It looks fancy. All around the world where you go, people are like, wow, such a nice jacket.
It's giving Gucci.
Yeah. But what about the other ones? Don't you want more than one? And I think this is South Africa. Everyone has more than one jacket in their closet 100%. And they get it out at different times. And if you've only got one, it's a bit like, oh,
what's wrong with you?
What's your deal?
And you're like, it's Gucci. And you're like, and mine is thrifted. Like, your point?
What are you going to do when it rains? You still going to wear that?
That's true. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Where's your coat? Where's your puffer? Where's your like rain jacket? Where's your corduroy? Whatever.
There's seasons, man.
Just coming a little bit back to talking about how different languages have different benefits and how one person's thought of advancing or advantaging their children by giving them only a certain language versus how you actually feel that might be a disadvantage to you. One thing that I just want to ask, or pick your brain on, Alex, is if we think about the conversation that we're having right now, what other advantages does speaking another language bring? It doesn't have to be something people look at as, so maybe in your situation, you might feel like this was a little bit of a disadvantage, but thus it's still a little bit actually of an advantage in the sense that you think of how they did it. If we start expanding our knowledge and learning on languages, how can it actually bring more benefit to us as people just by taking that step, would you say?
Well, speaking medically, speaking scientifically, there's all sorts of benefits now that have been proven to do with the brain and brain development. By speaking multiple languages, for example, it delays the onset of Alzheimer's and dementia by several years now if you are able to speak another language. And what's interesting is that the scientists have proven that that benefit is available to you regardless of which languages you speak and regardless of which stage of your life you start to learn them. So you don't have to be brought up bilingually to have that benefit. It's actually, even if you start learning a language much later in life, as plenty of people have, being able to speak in more than one language, being able to think in more than one language will delay the onset of Alzheimer's. It will also improve your cognitive functions and all sorts of things like that. That's all kind of medically proven stuff on a kind of anecdotal basis. I mean, just the flexibility of seeing the world in different ways and experiencing different things and that breadth of expression is just really, really cool.
And would you say that also, apart from the physical and mental benefits to speaking in another language, are there direct privileges that come with knowing another language? So privileges that you could get by knowing another language in another country. Do you kind of walk around? We were talking about passport privilege. Is there something like language privilege?
100%. Yes. I mean, even if there's just so many different ways that speaking another language can be an advantage. I mean, if you're just using it to have a private conversation with a friend that you don't want people to understand, that's something you can't do if you only speak English. And actually, as a native English speaker, I would always see people from other countries using their own languages to talk to each other, to kind of confer and then come back to us. Whereas me and my friends from the UK, if we travel somewhere, how do we have that private conversation to be like, I think he's charging us too much money? Because he can understand, you know, because we speak the language everyone speaks, you know. So having that secret language is a huge privilege like that. But it's also not just that. I mean, I obviously come from a migrational background. My grandmother was Greek and things like that. And a lot of people I know who also come from similar backgrounds, not being able to speak the language that their grandparents speak is a really huge thing. You know, not being able to speak to your own relatives in their language, in the language they actually think and speak in, you know. I mean, that's being able to connect with them in their language is a huge privilege that speaking multiple languages can bring you. And I think the value of that, if anyone's experienced that, is just immeasurable.
Incredible.
So let's say now, throughout this conversation, people's brains are being pickled and now they're just like, okay, but how do I do it? How do I pick up a language? What would you say is the best way to go about it?
There's three things. There's time, resources, materials. That's your kind of holy trinity of things that you need to get right in order to learn a language, right? So time, make that time commitment, show up, do it. I mean, I'd say an hour a day is kind of what you need to be aiming at, but that doesn't need to be in a block. I'd split that up into 15 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the afternoon, 15 minutes in the evening, and that's a bit more manageable. I actually have a YouTube video where I explain all about that. If you Google it, I call it the 15-30-15 method. And it's also something that I talk about a lot in my book, How to Speak Any Language Fluently. Once you've got your time allocated, that's when you're going to be showing up. But then the next thing is your materials. So what are you going to be using? What are the textbooks that are available? What are the teachers? How are you actually going to get that in? You need to do a bit of research to find out what are potentially good options to do that. So time, motivation, and resources. Motivation's the final thing. What are your goals? How are you going to measure your process? And how are you going to make sure that you're getting there? Because the thing about languages is like, it's the most amazing hobby in the world because it never runs out. You can never finish it. You can never complete it. It's not like a video game where you enjoy it and then one day it's done. The thing with languages is that it never stops. However much you know, there's always more to learn. So that's really, really important to remember. But it can also be quite overwhelming. So setting realistic goals and milestones that you achieve, whether that's, you know, something basic like I went into the supermarket today and managed to have every interaction I needed to have without using English. That's a really cool milestone, you know. Or
that's awesome.
I made a joke in a language that isn't my first language today and people laughed. That's another cool milestone, you know, things like that. But also, you know, you can do exam certificates, you can do all sorts of things that measure your progress. But having that is super, super important. So time, motivation, resources, sort those three things out, keep showing up, keep investing the time. Remember that it's going to take a long time to learn a foreign language. You're not going to do it just, you know, overnight, and you'll get there.
Nice. And you have a course, don't you?
I do. I mean, one of the things I do is I teach intensive German courses to people who are potentially thinking about moving to Germany or people who do a lot of business with Germany. And my aim with that course is to get people to a conversational level at least within about 3 months of regular learning. We study about 3 times a week, 3 hours every week. I also give extra lessons. By the end of those 3 months, I promise you will be conversational.
Wow.
Because I've done it with people before.
That's incredible. And I think that's very beneficial because right now, you know, Germany has kind of made the call to say we need people from other countries who can still speak a little bit of our language but have skill sets that we currently don't have to come into our country. And doing something like that would be incredibly beneficial.
And I think the really important thing is to look actually outside of the English-speaking world for the opportunities that are there. For example, studying in the UK is extremely expensive. Studying in America is extremely expensive. Australia as well. We're talking about huge amounts of money, which once you times by 20 whatever into rands is even more money. But Germany, for example, actually offers free higher education to people from all over the world. But you have to prove that you're able to operate on their courses with the language, which means you need a B2, C1 level to be able to do postgraduate study in Germany. But if you can demonstrate that you've got that, you don't actually have to pay for tuition.
Wow.
That is remarkable.
That is remarkable. Let's go to Germany, guys. Let's learn
Let's
German
learn the
first.
language.
Let's learn German
Let's learn the
first.
language.
That's the right order. Learn German, then
And then go.
Imagine taking a class in German, like, but not knowing
And
it.
it does.
You know what I mean?
No,
And then you
that
just-
sounds hectic. That sounds difficult. That sounds.
I think maybe you imagine that you're going to get to Germany and it's just going to be loads of intimidating German people speaking German really fast. But actually, because of this thing, so many people know that you can go to Germany and just study for free. You'll find a lot of people from all over the world in those classes and all sorts of different levels of German, and you'll probably fit in a lot better than you think you will.
That's comforting.
That's very comforting and encouraging. But one thing that I think could be discouraging for some of the viewers watching is we're sitting here, we're talking about learn languages, learn like or whatever. But what if, and this is most of us, I don't have the financial means to go and get professional classes in a certain language, right? And half of us who started Duolingo subscription or language, we stop at the point where it starts asking us to pay a subscription. What does one do if you're sitting here, you're watching this, and you're thinking, I don't have as much resources, but I have the motivation, which is the number one thing that you mentioned. What are some of the ways around that if you don't have financial means to expanding your knowledge in a certain language?
So learning a language, in my opinion, does not need to be expensive. I mean, it's like anything. You can spend as much money on it as you want to, but also as little as you want. Most of the languages that I speak, I've studied autodidactically, which means I've studied them on my own, with books, with CDs. I mean, when I even say the word CD, I age myself, because there was a time where you had to get the CD and put it in your car or put it in this. Now everything's available online, and most of the big publishing houses like Teach Yourself, Colloquial, they have that stuff available for free, just the audio, but you just need to buy the book. And the books can be a bit pricey, but actually the older editions and things are available now in secondhand bookshops for really, really, really low prices. I've seen all sorts of languages available for kind of like 100 Rand, less than that, in secondhand bookshops across South Africa. So, you know, it doesn't have to be this extremely expensive thing. You do need to get hold of the materials, but once you've got the materials, as long as you're disciplined with yourself and you show up to that time commitment that you made, you can study it by yourself.
Awesome. That's incredibly encouraging. I love to hear that. And I feel like there's no excuse. There's no excuse.
There's autonomy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have the motivation. Think about where you want to start and find the means of doing so. I do have a question though. At what point would you be able to put on your CV that you can speak another language? Like, let's talk a little bit about language and levels. In music, there's I don't know, stage or level, your grades, it's grades.
Yes.
In music, it's grades. In school, it's grades, whatever. Is there a way that you can measure language in a level? And do you have to put the level of language you're at when you are, let's say, applying for a foreign country? We're talking about points. How does one measure your level of language speaking, even if it's something that continues always?
Yeah, there is. And it really depends where you are. In Europe, this is a very commonly used way of measuring your language ability. So if you are thinking about emigrating to Europe or something like that, you need to be aware of this system, because your employer would expect you to back up your language learning claim with a specific certificate. So we have 6 levels in the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR. There's letters and numbers. So A, B, C is beginner, intermediate, advanced. And then we split that down into lower and upper. So A1 is your most basic level. A2 is you're already getting better. B1 is lower intermediate. B2 is where you need to be in a lot of countries in order to apply to study in that country. C1 is already a pretty good level of proficiency, and C2 is basically as proficient as you can get without being a native speaker. So there are actually exams you can do to prove that. You can prepare for them. But also all language courses in Europe for European languages are based around those 6 stages of A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2.
Okay.
And if we go back to the question of naturalizing and getting a passport, I believe most countries require you to have either a B2 or a C1 level in that language.
Okay.
So quite an advanced level.
Yeah.
Yes.
For you to be called a citizen of that country and to be given
Sure.
the privileges of having that passport, you need to prove that you can speak the language very, very well.
Wow.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So in order for me to move to Germany, there's quite a lot of studying I need to do.
Well,
I'm
Alex is
joking.
right here. Let's go get that course afterwards.
I will say, I don't know if I'd move to Germany.
I mean, at what level do you come out after learning your course, would you say then?
It depends, I mean, where you are. I mean,
Okay.
if people come to me as complete beginners, I can get them to kind of something like an A2 level or
Okay.
towards there. So, I mean,
Yes.
that's the point where if you're going to be
Yes.
moving to Germany,
Yes.
you'll be comfortable speaking, having interactions, having conversations, and navigating the world. If people come to me with an already more intermediate level, I try and get them more advanced. It depends on the student, but I can work with you.
That's
Lovely.
awesome. This was such a wonderful conversation, just expanding on language and the benefits of it, the privileges of it, kind of what it can do and open up for you in different countries, what you kind of need, a bit more of a resourceful conversation in terms of what it can do and how to get to those levels. Just some last things from both of you guys' side, something that you want to mention, just maybe a moment that dropped for you in this conversation, or last thing you'd like to add before we just close off today.
There was actually so much that dropped into my mind when it came to this conversation. I would say about what you mentioned with regards to learning a language as a part of like the heartbeat to the culture and to the people. And so much of learning the people and learning the culture and having true relationships is all tied in with language and the power of language when it comes to not only building connections and having relationships, but also a tool that you could use to have opportunities that you could never think or imagine. So yeah. And you?
I think my main message is that languages really just open up your world. And I really think that the world is there for you to explore and enjoy and get the most out of. English will get you to certain places, but there is a whole world out there where English can't get you.
Wow.
Yeah.
And speaking, every time you add a new language to your list, it's like you're coloring in another little part of the world that's suddenly open to you. And if you're thinking about emigrating, living in a different country, I definitely say, have a look at the opportunities that are happening not in English-speaking countries. Because, for example, we're seeing with Germany making 2 million visas available to people from outside the European Union. If you speak German, you've got a much better chance of getting one of those visas and going and experiencing that culture and then coming back to South Africa, hopefully one day, with all those experiences and memories to boot.
Absolutely love that. Thank you so much. It was such a privilege having you again with us here today. It's always such a pleasure speaking with you and expanding our minds on language and the minds of the viewers. And there you have it, guys. Color your world with the languages you know, and go beyond just with what English can do for you, but knowing languages in multiple countries, multiple languages, far and above and beyond just English. It was such a privilege and
Such a pleasure.
absolute pleasure. I'm Jade.
I'm Tsego.
And I'm Alex.
And that was TLT Talks. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.
See you again on the next one.